Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This will be episode 5 upon further review. And today we're going to discuss what we see ongoing this week, the protests slash riots or what have you going on in Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and across the country because there have been some demonstrations in LA and other places, often in the wake of police violence and or brutality. The reality is this: whether you call this a riot or a protest has a lot to do with your perspective. Because when the World Series is won and the NBA championship is delivered to a city that hasn't had in years, even in wins or losses, we often see people get out on the streets, get drunk and disorderly, and cause property damage. We rarely call them rioters. In fact, more property damage is done in actual value damage in the wake of sports teams winning and losing than what we see in a Ferguson, in a Baltimore, and now in a Minneapolis, Minnesota. And there's been a lot of debate as to why we see these types of reactions and a lot of conversations surrounding them. What I will say is, first and foremost, the looting and property violence is not the way to go. I don't encourage that. But that does not change the reality that people are pissed off. If you've ever wondered to yourself why we see so much outrage across the media for the murder of Mr. Lloyd up in Minneapolis versus the great red herring of black on black violence, the reality is in those violent situations, justice is going to be done when gang violence or a senseless shooting happens involving random citizens. You bet your bottom dollar somebody's going to be hunted, prosecuted, put away for life. That's happening sea to shining sea. But when we see government officials possibly get away with outright murder, when we know that they have abused their jobs to the point of instant firing, going beyond what their standard procedures are, beyond the pale, and the results in the death of the citizen, and people think they're going to get away with it, you bet your bottom dollar there's going to be outrage. You bet your bottom dollar that there's going to be pissed off people from sea to shining sea. Whether you live in, I've never set foot, I might have stopped through the airport in Minnesota, but it is enraging to see a man die and know that it is unfortunately more likely than not this person's going to get away with it. I can't even get the district attorney to bring charges, let alone will they stick, let alone will he be convicted, let alone will he be sentenced to an appropriate punishment. That is the heart of disobedience, protest, and rioting. We have had, with the wake of COVID-19, the government come and shut down private businesses. And we have seen protesters march on the capital of their respective states armed to the teeth. And they show up and they demonstrate and they yell and scream and they go home. And that a can of tear gas is dispersed. Don't even think anybody showed up in riot gear. And in the face of overt violence from the state, from the city, from the county, in these officer involved killings of unarmed, nonviolent people, the idea that they're just going to get away, resign and or quit or be fired and go be a police officer someplace else is enraging. If you cannot understand that as the listener, I don't know what more to tell you.
People have to understand, like you said, people are legitimately pissed off. They are more than just pissed off, they are feeling hurt, abused, and neglected. And it's only so many times you can keep kicking a dog before that dog turns around and bites you. And what we're seeing of all these people, and mind you, looking at these protesters, half of them are white. They and it's
Uh-huh.
these young, especially these young white people, are starting to see, especially because with all this stuff now coming out on videotape, they have no choice but to see all the violence that is begotten on African Americans in this country. And when they go out and they exercise their right, which every American citizen is allowed to protest and assemble, what do they see? Right? They see that the police have already responded a level higher than what they came at. They already see the police are out there with riot gear and tanks and all types of barricades and blockades and all types of men holding the line, waving a baton, ready to like they're going to go to war. You got police on horseback, like they're one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, ready to just administer their judgment on you because you decided to protest them. You decided to protest the fact that they are killing African Americans out on the streets and nobody's being held accountable. And you see that all the negative publicity that these things get from the onset. I mean, they're calling these peaceful protests almost riots as soon as people assemble. Before anything or any kind of destruction of property, which I'm with you, Troy, I don't agree with, before any kind of destruction of property can even occur, they are already in there in force, meeting them at a level higher than which they came. And I think it's a symptom of, they look at people who protest police, they're viewed in a different light. They're viewed as violent, unruly, need to be taught a lesson, need to be contained version of protesters versus, like you said, when people come in, when they're doing, I remember when Virginia, when they were passing those gun laws there, when they came in, those guys were armed to the teeth, guns out, tactical gear, and
Faces covered.
faces covered. And they're out there and they are not nearly met with such force or opposition because you know what? They respect those protesters. Those protesters are white. Those protesters are have a valid point because they're fighting for one of the amendments. Well, what about us? Why aren't we afforded the same respect and also afford the same same rights to assemble and protest that other people are?
And I'll tell you this one thing, and I get it for those out there, African American men and women, minorities. You might be hesitant. You might be a little weirded out because I do feel, and that's almost a topic for another day, our embrace of the Second Amendment and gun rights. But I assure you this, whether and how the police treat you and how much respect they give has a lot to do with whether or not they respect your power and authority in the moment. From those armed protesters in Richmond, armed protesters in the state of Michigan, even I could go so far back as to the armed black protesters of the Black Panthers when they used to patrol the streets carrying those weapons. You know what they did? They changed the law because they were afraid of this because they weren't breaking any. But you know what? They didn't assault them then and there. They changed the law and found other ways to get to them. That's another topic for a day. But firepower is what unfortunately commands respect in the minds and in the eyes and in the moment of a lot of people. You see, you cannot come up to a heavily armed to the teeth crowd dropping tear gas with your batons and your riot shields. Not going to work. When they show up to collect on Amon Bundy's ranch and he believes it's unconstitutional, that squad that they showed up with met with the equal, if not more, amount of guns, snipers, rifles, handguns. You want to have a shootout? Have at you. But you know what? The leader of that unit and those police in that situations, you make the wrong move, y'all going to die. Your life is immediately in danger. It's not just an unarmed person that we get to impose our will upon. It changes the game. I am all for the Second Amendment being used in a legal manner, in a healthy manner, and often legally in protest. Because that is, to me, is the big difference. I posted a meme earlier today. Stay away from the looting, the burning, and the property damage. Start buying some firearms when you're getting involved with these sorts of things. Because the reality is there's more people than there are police. There's more people. Arm yourselves legally. Train yourselves. carry in demonstration. We've seen it. We've seen people armed to the teeth, able to walk in, protest, and get their point across and go home without a can of tear gas being dropped off. We've got to start embracing that tactic. We've got to start seeing it. We've got to start raising that sort of legal, yet still safe, hell. Because coming out there and just peacefully protesting, it gets ignored. Colin Kaepernick used to peacefully protest. Whether you disagreed with when he did it, how he did it, why he did it, one thing is undeniable. It was peaceful. And he was treated like hell for it. And we are sitting here in a day and age where peaceful protest isn't being listened to. It's being ignored. It's being glossed over. Armed protest is heard. Armed protest is respected. Armed protest makes laws change. It makes, even in Virginia, they were managed to halt some of those gun laws from going through. People paid attention. The politicians and the government are supposed to fear the people. You're supposed to respect the people. And when they do not, there is only one thing, in my personal opinion, that stands in that way, and that is that Second Amendment. That is the fact that we are not going to go silently into the night. And until we start embracing that, I think you're going to start seeing this sort of reaction. It's going to be tear gas every single time.
One of my favorite comedians, Dave Chappelle, you brought up a point that made me remind me of a bit he did. And in that bit he said that Black people could single-handedly solve the gun issues and gun violence issues in America. And he said, you know how that would happen? If every Black person that was able to bought a gun. They would change the laws so fast. Because what they're scared of is you actually exercising your right to bear arms and be protected the same way they are, right? So it's funny and it's true at the same time, and it's actually really sad that they give you a different level of respect just for having that on your hip. Why? I don't know. It's because at this point they have to respect you, I assume. They have to acknowledge, have to say, I have to treat this guy like a human being, because if not, and they feel threatened, they're going to exercise every option they have to protect themselves. And until they have that in their mind, that as a whole, the people, we could do that, then they're not going to respect it. Now, kind of back to the looting and everything talked about, totally condone that. And this is what the media does. There are looters that happen. There are people who are opportunistic, taking advantage of the protest, largely peaceful protests, and using that to go ahead and commit crime, right? That's not nothing new, The only difference is the media sensationalization of it and making it seem like all the protest has now shifted to some kind of violent riot and looting where everybody has lost their minds and all the cities burning down, all the stores and businesses are being under attack. The media always tries to take a few instances, have a camera stationed at one place, and act like it's happening over the city. When we know for a fact that this is our isolated incident. They want everyone to think that these people cannot peacefully protest. They want everybody to think that all the protesters are involved in this, whereas actually a very small minority of looters and bad actors who have used this as a guise, as a cover to commit crimes that they could feel like they could get away with. So I don't want people to believe what they see on the media as far as everybody out there is rioting and looting. Everybody up there has just lost their minds, because that's not all the case. That's actually not the case in most of the instances. A very small minority of bad actors using this unfortunate events to their personal benefit. So that's one thing that you have to be cognizant of when looking at this and reviewing everything that's going on. I think you need more people, and this also is a symptom of something that we haven't had since the civil rights movement, is strong leadership, right? That when people look for someone to turn to, someone to really bring everybody together and have everybody move under one cohesive movement, you notice that that leader is not present. We don't have any MLKs. We don't have any Malcolm X's of today, right? There's no one to galvanize people with a call to action and unify those groups to actually make everything kind of cohesive and make all the movements, make it more of a strategical thing than people just getting frustrated. And that's one thing that, hopefully somebody will step up and take that mantle. Hopefully somebody will step up and be that key figure, because there's a lot of people, and where there's people, there's power. And all we need is that power to be funneled in an appropriate place to really make some changes happen.
And the leadership is a big thing, because even in these gun rights protests, um, even in going all the way back to Charlottesville, believe it or not, they actually have a leader who like filed protest permits, and that's how you knew it was coming, and that's how we knew what day was going to happen, where they were going to go, what they were be, what they weren't going to be. In the gun rights movements, even on Richmond, I remember they planned it, they picked the day, they made some quick rules. No, don't, not in the Capitol, out here in the square. They fenced them in, and they actually adhered to that and demonstrated even armed to the teeth. And see, the problem is we wait until these flashpoints to get here, but the protests must be better organized. We don't have a specific leader that takes care of these sorts of things, but we need that to step in, follow those same permits, follow the same laws. And we be perfectly clear, I want the laws followed. Every state is different. Every city is different. And I want these protests to continue to go down just as peacefully as we saw the gun protests. I'm a pro Second Amendment person. I believe everybody should have that right. At the same time, we've got to start taking advantage of that and staying away from the petty looting and what have you. Because that one bad apple doesn't spoil the bunch. We love to say that when officers are cracking skulls. But when it comes to outraged public and populace, protesting murders of citizens in which we feel and cannot yet see justice being done, now this one bad apple surely ruins the whole bunch. And a lot of it is the media manipulation, what gets the ratings. Nothing gets ratings like burning buildings. Nothing gets ratings like pissed off people and Molotov cocktails. And I can bet you this, if you look at the history of the government in this country, if you want to bust a protest, you can absolutely put a bad actor in that protest and have them spark that, so we can claim looting, come in here and crack heads and drop the tear gas. But first and foremost, know your laws, follow them, keep it peaceful. You can get pissed off and peaceful, but you can keep it peaceful. And embrace that Second Amendment, man, because I feel as though we as a community turn away from it. Those with the power get to wield it. And unfortunately, for some, the guns are the power in America and in its culture and its society.
And I think we can have a whole nother podcast on African Americans and our perceived aversion to the Second Amendment. I don't know why that is, but we can dive into that in another podcast. I just want to kind of like get back to the people, and like you said, this is a very incendiary event. We always wait until there is an incident and to respond, to react. We're very reactionary. We're not very proactive in this. We wait till an incident happens, a police brutality that's called on tape. We react. We get upset. We protest. We post some stuff online, and then time goes by, and that just starts fading into the back of your memory until another one happens, and the same cycle repeats itself. And this is, like I said, without strong leadership to say, you know what, I'm not going to let people's, raging fire die inside them. I'm going to keep stoking the flames, and I'm going to keep getting at people to assemble and protest in different cities. And it's going to be strategic, it's going to be organized, it's going to be coordinated across the nation to the point where the protest has become so much of a burden that they have to respond. They have to respond. They have to start making changes because we will not stop. And until a person like that comes along and brings everyone together and gets everybody on the same sheet of music, this, unfortunately, I foresee is a cycle that will continue on and on and on. This has no end in sight because there is no meaningful change happening at the ballot office. I mean, at the ballot box. There is no policy change that I see coming out that they're self-policing and doing, and there is no galvanized, coordinated effort across everyone from coast to coast to organize and protest and make it a point so this stops happening. And until that type of things happen, then this unfortunately is going to be a cycle that continues itself. A month, 2 months, 3 months from now, we'll catch one of another video posting online, and the outrage happens again. And it's frustrating because we're stuck in a cycle. We know that everything's messed up. We know that the police crack down, abuse their powers, and they disproportionately do it to African Americans. And we know that there is not going to be a strong response from government, but yet the cycle continues. And in order to break the cycle, we have to do something different. We have to come together and we have to unite. And it's not just African Americans, it's everybody. As an American citizen, you should be outraged at what you saw. This should not be, oh, this just happened to Black people. This should get under your skin. This happened to a fellow American. This happened to somebody I went to school with. This happened to my neighbor. This happened to my colleague at work. This happened to the guy I worked out at the gym. This is unacceptable. Just like you wouldn't want this to happen to your child if you're not Black, you imagine what it's like for us raising our children, for us going out to work. Imagine having that fear in the back of your head constantly that any time a police pulls you over, you have any kind of police interaction. There's been people who've been killed off of mistaken identity. They weren't even the person they were looking for, and they've been killed, right? Until you start to put yourselves in our shoes and realize like this is unacceptable for it to happen to a fellow citizen in my country in the year 2020, then this is going to continue to happen. We have to come together. We have to make our voices heard, and we have to change the culture of policing and how in its regards to African Americans.
And you know what? It's funny. What people often are not bothered by things that don't directly affect them. But I tell you what, when them gun rights got threatened, we saw protests. And when we see these rise of red flag laws in some of these states, that's a whole separate topic. But I know some hesitant conservatives, when it comes to the police brutality, they're a little bit confused. But put it in terms you understand, the police are showing up and they're here to take your guns because someone made a complaint. And we've seen people die on serving red flag laws. There's no court hearing. There's no what have you. Hey, we're here. Hand them over. And we've seen the combativeness because you feel as though you're interacting with law enforcement, again, the armed enforcement agency of your local, state, or federal government, and you don't like that interaction. You don't want to be stopped and harassed while engaging in what you think is free behavior and commerce and things you have a right to do. Well, that's what's happening in an African American community. And that's why people are rioting, pissed off, and protesting. You're going to get that anger. And until we start coming together and ending that, and ending the misconduct, ending the lack of consequences of the actions of the government, people are going to be pissed. And we're going to see more and more riots. We're going to see it over and over and again.
In closing, just like I said on our last pod, we are every civil servant's boss, politicians, police, and everybody in between. We have to hold our employees accountable. We have to fire them if they are not doing a good job. We have to make sure we put the people in place, we hire the right people who are going to get the job done. And until we do that, we're going to continue to see these issues wholesalely go unaddressed. They wait for the steam to cool off, everybody to calm down a bit, and they try to go on with life. There should be no more going on, no more just moving forward, no more just, oh well, that's how things are. We need to be able to fix it. This problem can be fixed, but it cannot be fixed without our help as a collective citizen of the United States of America. We have to come together. We have to do this. We have to put people and policies in place that protect every citizen equally and make it so that any a atmosphere of police brutality cannot exist. It gets rooted out. So remember, everybody, that you are in charge. You are the boss. You are the one who have to hold your employees accountable.